What if I told you that in the early 1960s, top officials in the U.S. government approved a plan to murder American citizens just to justify a war? A plan so shocking, so twisted, that it sounds like something ripped straight out of a dystopian thriller. But it was real, a government conspiracy, not imagined, not whispered in secret forums, but written, documented, and signed. This was not a fringe idea. It came from the highest levels of power, the Pentagon, and it was deadly serious. Operation Northwoods. If you're fascinated by hidden history, black ops, and the darkest corners of government secrecy, this is a story you must hear. Before we dive deep into this chilling plan, do me a quick favor. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more real-life conspiracies and forbidden history. Smash that like button to help this video reach more people, because YouTube doesn't want stories like this getting out. And drop a comment below. What would you have thought if you were alive when this plan was being approved? Would you have believed it? All right, buckle up. Let's uncover a plan where America plotted to attack itself and blamed someone else. The year is 1962. The Cold War is burning white-hot. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a global chess match. And Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, has become a major piece on the board. After the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro rose to power and aligned himself with the Soviets. Washington, too. This was more than a nuisance. It was a threat to the very existence of American democracy. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had left the Kennedy administration embarrassed and desperate. The CIA had tried to remove Castro through covert means, but he remained firmly in power. American officials feared Cuba would become a launching pad for Soviet missiles. Tensions were high, fear was everywhere, and behind the scenes, the U.S. military was growing restless. They wanted regime change. In this climate of fear and urgency, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military leaders in the U.S., developed a radical plan. If they couldn't provoke a war with Cuba through traditional means, maybe they could fabricate a reason. They called it Operation Northwoods, a false flag operation, a strategy where a nation attacks itself, blames the enemy, and justifies military retaliation. But this wasn't just theoretical. These were detailed proposals, written memos, internal approvals. This was the government plotting terror against its own people, with the goal of manipulating public opinion. And the most disturbing part, they were ready to do it. For decades, the American public had no idea this plan even existed. It wasn't until the 1990s, when thousands of Cold War documents were declassified, that the truth began to leak. Among them, a memo dated March 13, 1962, Cuba, titled Justification by General Lyman Military Intervention, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Inside that memo was a chilling list of proposed attacks. The military would stage fake hijackings of civilian airliners, blow up U.S. ships in Guantanamo Bay, and even orchestrate terrorist attacks in American cities, targeting innocent civilians. The blame? It would all fall on Fidel Castro and Cuba. They talked about faking funerals for victims of staged crashes. They suggested using real or simulated casualties. They even proposed using drone aircraft to simulate commercial flights being shot down. Everything was fair game, as long as the public believed Cuba was the aggressor. And here's the kicker. The plan was officially presented to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, meaning this wasn't just military fantasy. This was an actual proposed U.S. operation at the highest levels of government. The operation's core philosophy? The ends justify the means. Operation Northwoods wasn't vague. It wasn't theoretical. It was disturbingly specific. Within the memo, the U.S. military outlined a series of possible false flag scenarios that would create outrage, fear, and public support for war against Cuba. These weren't ideas thrown around in a brainstorming session. They were methodically listed, evaluated, and refined. One proposed operation involved blowing up a U.S. Navy ship in Guantanamo Bay, then blaming it on Cuban saboteurs. Another scenario suggested hijacking of civilian airliners by Cuban operatives, with the planes crashing or disappearing under mysterious circumstances. They even recommended staging funerals for fake victims to amplify the emotional response in the American media. There was also a plan to simulate the shooting down of a U.S. military drone disguised as a civilian aircraft. The goal was to claim that Cuban forces had attacked innocent Americans, a modern-day Lusitania, designed to outrage the public and rally the nation behind a full-scale military intervention. Even more chilling, some proposals included orchestrated terrorist bombings in American cities. The memo discusses targeting real civilians, using explosives and fabricated Cuban documents to leave behind. These acts of domestic terrorism would then be broadcast as evidence of Cuban hostility, making war not just a political option, but a moral imperative. The coldness of these tactics is what shocks most readers today. The Joint Chiefs didn't suggest military action as a last resort. They actively sought to deceive their own citizens, to manufacture war through lies, violence, and the sacrifice of innocent life. This wasn't just strategy. It was psychological warfare turned inward. When Operation Northwoods reached the desk of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and, ultimately, President John F. Kennedy, the response was clear. Absolutely not. Kennedy was horrified. He saw the plan not only as unethical, betrayal of the very principles the U.S. claimed to defend during the Cold War. JFK's refusal created immediate tension with the military leadership. General Lyman Lemnitzer, who had championed the operation, quickly fell out of favor. Though Kennedy didn't publicly expose Northwoods, he rejected it outright and soon removed Lemnitzer from his position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This internal clash between the presidency and the military-industrial complex echoed deeper fears. Kennedy already had. He had warned in speeches about secret plots, about the growing influence of unelected power in Washington. Operation Northwoods, to him, was proof that elements within his own government were willing to cross unthinkable lines. Some historians believe Northwoods was part of a larger pattern, that JFK was increasingly at odds with the intelligence community, especially after the Bay of Pigs and his refusal to escalate the Vietnam War early. He was pushing back against the Cold War machine, and that resistance made enemies. Kennedy's decision to kill Northwoods would forever cement him as a president willing to stand against his own military when he believed the truth and the Constitution demanded it. But it also raised questions that still haunt us. What if he hadn't said no? Why would the leaders of the most powerful military in the world consider attacking their own people? The answer lies not just in Cold War paranoia, but in the deeply embedded doctrine of perception management. Winning public opinion was often considered as important as winning battles. The military believed that if the American people could be shown a clear, emotional reason to go to war with Cuba, they would rally behind it, just as they had after Pearl Harbor and later 9/11s. The goal wasn't just to defeat an enemy, but to control the narrative. Operation Northwoods was about engineering consent. This doctrine wasn't new. In fact, similar tactics had been considered throughout history, from the Gleiwitz incident used by Nazi Germany to justify invading Poland, to the mysterious Gulf of Tonkin event that led to U.S. escalation in Vietnam. History is littered with examples of justifications that were manipulated or entirely fabricated. What made Northwoods so disturbing, however, was its scale and cold efficiency. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't desperate. It was calm, deliberate, and bureaucratically approved. These weren't wild-eyed extremists or generals in uniform proposing murder as policy. It reveals a dangerous mindset that the ends, regime change, geopolitical advantage, security can justify any means, even sacrificing the people you swear to protect. And that mindset didn't disappear when Northwoods was shelved. After JFK shut it down, Operation Northwoods was buried quietly. There were no public hearings, no media leaks, no whistleblowers. For decades, the American public remained completely in the dark, until the 1990s, when the Assassination Records Review Board began releasing files related to JFK's assassination, that researchers stumbled upon the horrifying memo. Suddenly, historians, journalists, and conspiracy theorists alike had something tangible. A declassified document signed by top military officials detailing plans to fake attacks on Americans to start a war. It was no longer a conspiracy theory, it was fact. Still, the revelation made barely a ripple. Most Americans never heard of Northwoods. The media didn't amplify it. School books didn't mention it. It was as if the story had been scrubbed from the national consciousness. Too dark, too uncomfortable, too close to home. But the few who read the document couldn't unsee it. They began to ask deeper questions. If this was planned in the 60s, what else might have been considered or carried out in secret? How many other lies, staged events, or hidden operations have shaped American history? Without the public ever knowing, Northwoods became a symbol, a warning. That truth is often classified, that power can become unaccountable, and that sometimes the real enemy doesn't come from outside, it grows within. The legacy of Operation Northwoods didn't die with the 1960s. In fact, its very existence has fueled decades of suspicion toward the U.S. government. Every time a major national tragedy or foreign war occurs, there are those who ask, was this real or was it engineered? 9/11s happened when skeptics quickly pointed to Northwoods as precedent. They asked whether history was repeating itself, whether fear was being weaponized to justify endless war. Though the official 9/11th narrative is widely accepted, the shadow of Northwoods looms large in the minds of those who question government transparency. The use of false flag operations as a tool of statecraft hasn't disappeared. Many intelligence communities around the world still consider it a valid tactic. Ukraine, in Syria, and cyber warfare, deception remains a powerful weapon. Northwoods was simply one of the first times it was exposed so blatantly. Today, we live in an era of deep fakes, disinformation, and psychological manipulation. The idea of governments faking events or controlling public perception doesn't seem so outrageous anymore. In fact, it seems normal. Northwoods, once dismissed as madness, now feels eerily prophetic. And so the story matters more than ever. But because it reminds us to ask hard questions, to demand truth, to never assume the official story is the whole story, because sometimes it isn't. The shocking part about Operation Northwoods isn't just that it was written, but that no one spoke out for decades. Not a single whistleblower from within the Pentagon or the White House came forward to expose the plan when it mattered most. In an era before WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, silence was the norm, and dissent came with a price. Who dared to challenge the military hierarchy or the intelligence apparatus faced career destruction, surveillance, or worse. The Cold War had created a climate of fear, not only of communists but of questioning the state itself. Loyalty to the flag meant obedience, even when orders were morally indefensible. It wasn't until the declassification process in the 1990s that the truth surfaced, and even then, it wasn't because someone heroically leaked the information. It was simply buried in a mountain of JFK assassination-related files. Almost by accident, the plan to terrorize Americans in the name of war was exposed to the public. This leads to an uncomfortable truth. Had the plan been approved, it's likely it would have been executed and never uncovered. History is filled with hidden operations we may never know. Northwoods is just one that happened to slip through the cracks. The silence around Northwoods speaks volumes about power and secrecy. In a government of classified documents and need-to-know briefings, how much is the public truly allowed to know? And how many other shelved plans still lie waiting in the dark? A haunting question remains. If Operation Northwoods had been approved, would it have worked? The answer, disturbingly, is likely yes. The public at the time was already on edge, conditioned by years of anti-communist rhetoric and fear-mongering. One well-timed, emotionally charged attack would have been more than enough to rally support for a full-scale invasion. The American people were still reeling from the Cuban Missile Crisis and the humiliation of the Bay of Pigs. Trust in the military and government was high. The media, back then, functioned largely as a patriotic amplifier of official narratives. Few journalists would have questioned a presidential address stating that Cuba had attacked American soil. The proposed events, bombings, hijackings, sabotage were strategically selected, not just for shock value, but for narrative control. They were tailored to create just enough chaos to trigger an emotional response, but not so much as to destabilize the U.S. itself. It was war propaganda masquerading as tragedy. Public pressure would have mounted overnight. Congress would have declared war. Military action would have followed swiftly. And the truth that it was all orchestrated might never have seen daylight. After all, the victors write the history books. This chapter is a sobering reminder that democracy is fragile. Public opinion can be manipulated. And if no one is watching, no one questions the origin of the war, only its outcome. Operation Northwoods doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a larger, unsettling pattern in American history, one where truth is often the first casualty of war. From the sinking of the USS Maine to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, history is peppered with questionable justifications for military conflict. In the 1898 Spanish-American War, the explosion in Havana Harbor was blamed on Spain, rallying Americans into war. But evidence later suggested the explosion may have been an accident. Decades later, in 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was used to escalate U.S. involvement in Vietnam, despite serious doubts about whether the attack even occurred. These events, like Northwoods, show a willingness among leaders to manipulate or even fabricate events when public support is lacking. It's not just about defeating enemies, creating them. It's about, in this context, Northwoods was not a bizarre outlier. It was just another chapter in a long history of state-sponsored narrative crafting. Understanding Northwoods means recognizing a pattern, one where wars often begin not with a declaration, but with a story, a broadcast, a headline, a moment of fear. The manipulation of that moment is what determines whether peace prevails or bombs fall. This history matters because it forces us to confront the uncomfortable. Some of the most pivotal events in modern history were not what they seemed, and that power, unchecked, can turn inward. Operation Northwoods became fertile ground for conspiracy theories, and understandably so. When people learned the U.S. government once considered staging terrorist attacks on its own soil to start a war, it cracked open the floodgates of suspicion. From that point on, any major tragedy, a school shooting, a bombing, a terrorist attack, came under immediate scrutiny. Was this a false flag? Became a common question among skeptics. In many circles, Northwoods became the go-to proof that governments are willing to sacrifice their own if the geopolitical reward is high enough. Some theorists even tie Northwoods to later historical events. They argue that 9/11 followed a similar pattern, a shocking symbolic attack blamed on foreign actors that led to massive public fear, unrestricted surveillance, and 2 decades of war. While no official connection exists, keep suspicion alive. Others see echoes of Northwoods in media manipulation, psychological operations, and even in Hollywood's portrayal of war. Wag the dog scenarios, where the war is staged for the cameras, now seem plausible, not satirical. When fiction and reality blur, trust erodes, and paranoia grows. Operation Northwoods didn't just die in the archives. It birthed a new generation of distrust, one that asks, what aren't they telling us? What are they still more capable of? So why does this forgotten Cold War memo still matter in the 21st century? Because it's not just a historical footnote, it's a warning. Operation Northwoods reminds us that democracy, when unguarded, can be hijacked from within. That deception can come wearing the uniform of patriotism. In an age of endless wars, mass surveillance, and growing authoritarianism, the lessons of Northwoods are more relevant than ever. If leaders once plotted to kill Americans to start a war, who's to say what lines might be crossed today in the name of security or national interest? It also reminds us of the importance of transparency, whistleblowers, and independent journalism. The only reason we know about Northwoods is because someone, somewhere, released the documents. Without oversight, these plans don't die. They evolve. The memo also forces citizens to re-evaluate blind trust in institutions, not to descend into cynicism, but to practice informed skepticism. A healthy democracy relies on questions, accountability, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Ultimately, Operation Northwoods is more than just a declassified conspiracy. It's a mirror, one that reflects the darkest corners of power. And the real question is, what would you do if it happened again, and no one believed you? In the planning of Operation Northwoods, there was an unspoken assumption. The media would comply, whether through manipulation, censorship, or patriotic fervor. The press was seen not as a watchdog, but as a potential megaphone for the lie. It wasn't necessary to control every journalist, only to control the narrative. At the time, news was centralized. A few powerful networks and newspapers shaped public opinion. With a well-crafted press release and a few staged images, it wouldn't have been hard to convince Americans that Cuba had struck first. The era of live-streamed bombings and instant fact-checking was still decades away. The architects of Northwoods didn't just plan operations, they planned public perception. They envisioned broadcasts of destroyed planes, grieving families, and indisputable evidence pointing to Castro. The plan's success depended as much on psychology and media coordination as on logistics. Had Northwoods been executed, the media could have been the greatest accomplice, not through malice but through trust. Trust in the government and official sources, and in the belief that patriotic duty meant spreading the approved version of the truth. This reveals a critical lesson. In any modern conflict, control the narrative and you control the outcome. And sometimes the most dangerous weapon in war is not a bomb, it's a lie wrapped in a headline. Today we live in a world of information overload. But with more information comes more sophisticated disinformation. If Operation Northwoods were designed today, it wouldn't rely on physical sabotage or staged hijackings. It would likely be digital, psychological, and viral. Imagine deepfake videos of Cuban soldiers attacking civilians, social media bots spreading coordinated panic, hacked news feeds showing fabricated footage. In the digital age, truth is not what happened, it's what trends. And the same tools we use to stay informed can be turned against us. The core principle of Northwoods, using lies to manufacture consent, is more viable now than ever. With AI-generated content and polarized echo chambers, today could require nothing more than a convincing post and a few manipulated images. The frightening thing? We may already have lived through modern Northwoods-like events and never known it. The line between truth and fiction has blurred so much that facts are no longer persuasive, only emotions are. Understanding Northwoods in the digital era means staying vigilant. We must question not only what we see, but why we're seeing it and who benefits if we believe it. Why do false flag operations work so well? The answer lies in human psychology. In moments of fear and chaos, our brains seek simple answers. We want someone to blame. We want the comfort of knowing our government will strike back. False flags exploit this primal need. Operation Northwoods was designed with this in mind. Its creators knew that if Americans were attacked or thought they would rally around the flag. Even skeptics would stay silent out of fear of being unpatriotic. War unites, silences, and fear. Psychological operations like Northwoods don't just create enemies, they manufacture unity. They define us versus them and erase the middle ground. This binary thinking is a powerful political tool and a dangerous one. False flags are not just about faking attacks. They're about controlling the collective emotion of a nation. They make fear a tool of policy. And once fear takes hold, logic and dissent are drowned out by survival instincts. Northwoods, less about explosions, in its terrifying elegance, and more about emotional detonation. A weapon, not of war, but of belief. Even after its declassification, Operation Northwoods leaves us with glaring mysteries. Who else knew about it? Were similar plans proposed after JFK's rejection? Were any elements of it ever quietly implemented without public awareness? Some researchers believe that Northwoods was not a one-time aberration, but one chapter in a broader culture of covert manipulation within the military-industrial complex. If one plan like this existed, how many others were drafted or carried out without detection? Documents can be redacted, testimonies can be buried, Entire operations can be written off as speculation, and with agencies operating behind layers of classification, the truth can be sanitized beyond recognition. There are even reports that some ideas in Northwoods may have been resurrected or mirrored in later operations around the world, while there's no direct evidence tying it to specific events. The DNA of the plan, the logic of fear-based manipulation, persists. Northwoods is not just about what we know. It's about what we'll never know. And sometimes the most chilling truths are hidden not by lies, but by silence. Operation Northwoods teaches us more than just a piece of forgotten history. It offers a glimpse into how unchecked power distorts morality. When winning becomes more important than truth, the unthinkable becomes strategy. And they're invisible until it's too late. This isn't just about the Cold War or Cuba or JFK. It's about the ethical collapse that occurs when ends justify means. It's about how easy it is to dehumanize citizens in pursuit of a political objective, and how fragile our systems are when fear becomes currency. We must ask, if Northwoods had been greenlit and executed, how would it have changed our world? Would we have entered an endless cycle of false justifications for conflict already? Or have we isn't just metaphorical? It's a real place where the line between right and wrong vanishes under the pressure of power, secrecy, and ambition. Northwoods peered into that abyss and nearly jumped. Our only defense is awareness and memory. Because if we forget that our own leaders once considered sacrificing innocents to start a war, we're doomed to let history repeat in even darker ways. What makes Operation Northwoods truly terrifying isn't just the plan itself. It's the fact that it almost happened. High-ranking officials in the U.S. government seriously considered staging deadly attacks on American soil, sacrificing innocent lives and manipulating the media, all to justify a war they believed was necessary. This wasn't the plot of a dystopian novel. It was real, written, signed, archived. A plan where truth was disposable and deception was a tool of statecraft. But one signature, John F. Kennedy's refusal, stopped it. One decision prevented a possible chain reaction of terror, war, and decades of mistrust. His no echoed louder than any explosion ever could. It reminded us that in the heart of power, conscience still matters. Yet even as we look back, we must also look forward. Because the mechanisms behind Northwoods, secrecy, manipulation, false flags, still exist, and in the wrong hands they can rise again, updated for a new generation and a digital battlefield. The story of Operation Northwoods is not just a chilling, a permanent warning. If we are not vigilant, the next false war might be fought not on the battlefield, but in our minds. If this story shocked you, if it made you question everything you thought you knew about history, war, and truth, then you're exactly the kind of person we need in this community. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss deep dives like this. Like this video if you believe stories like Operation Northwoods must be remembered and shared. And most importantly, leave a comment. Do you think similar plans could still exist today? Has something like this already happened, and we just didn't see it? Your voice helps us shine light into the shadows. Let's uncover the hidden files together. The greatest conspiracies are not always the ones that succeed. Sometimes the ones that almost happen tell us far more about the system we live under. Operation Northwoods was not executed, but it was written, approved, supported, and hidden for decades. Now the truth. And once you've seen what your government is willing to do, you never see the world the same way again. Until next time, stay aware, question everything, and never stop searching for the truth in the noise. This was the Hidden Files. See you in the next investigation.